We're speaking at a really critical juncture here in terms of USAID reform and leadership. We've been reflecting at DevEx on where this agency is going, what the future can and should look like, what a transformed USAID would look like, what a localized USAID would look like, and you've got a lot of big ideas about that. So you come down to sort of three major conclusions. Do you want to run through them and we can sort of discuss what those would mean in practice in terms of what needs to happen to get to the vision that you have in mind?
Absolutely. The three basic ideas that I had for how to proceed and to take some of these ideas and put them into practice are first, that we would respond more to ideas that came from the developing countries themselves. Right now, we're really in a system where USAID or people in the United States design and develop all of the programs, what we're going to do, where, what are our objectives, when and how we're going to accomplish them, and then we find somebody to carry it out. But I think that the whole engine for development needs to be located in the developing country. They need to have the power of the ideas and the vision of where we're headed. And we still have the ability to say, yes, I'm going to fund this, no, I'm not going to fund that. But it should be much less short-term projects and much longer-term investment in change agents, giving long-term core support to the people who really have the vision of how they're going to make change in their country so that it's going to grow and develop.
In other words, the aid localization doesn't mean coming up with a great idea in Washington and hiring a local organization to do it. It starts well before that.
Exactly. That's precisely the point, that we're not hiring them to do our work. We want to support them in doing their own work. I fully recognize how difficult that is in practice. And a lot of the ideas that are going to come out of a developing country are either going to be not fully formed, not well thought through, maybe don't have the advantage of knowing the experience of having tried it in another place. But that's where USAID does its work. You go in and you negotiate and you talk to them and you massage the proposal until it's something that you can support. And actually that's exactly what MCC has been doing. The first idea that they ever get from a foreign country is almost never bears close resemblance to what they end up funding. But at least it's, the ideas are generated locally and they feel a greater ownership of it.
Right.
So the second part of that I call getting out of the driver's seat, which means instead of micromanaging and controlling every aspect of how a program is carried out, to substitute just a transparency about what they're doing. So if all the information of how the money's being spent, what they're accomplishing, where it is in the process is available, not just to the U.S. government, not just to USAID, but to the people of the country who are most interested in the project, to Congress and to everyone, you can judge and see how well is this project doing, is it achieving, and that's so much less constraining than a long list of, yes, you can spend the money for this, but not that, and it has to be done this way, but not that way, and can I get a pre-approval for a travel claim? I mean, you get so caught up in these restrictions that you don't get to spend the time thinking and acting.
Right.
So that was the second part of it.
It seems to me, though, that part of that, the second conclusion, relies on people's sincere interest in seeing development work. In other words, transparency can work for you and against you, right? And as long as USAID exists in this sort of antagonistic environment where every single mistake, every single failure is an existential threat to the agency, isn't that barrier to transparency going to be there until we sort of get over that fear of failure?
Well, first of all, the transparency train is already moving. We have this dashboard, the Foreign Assistance Dashboard, that tries to explain how and where U.S. foreign assistance is being spent. We are complying with the International Aid Transparency Initiative, which is very important, although we're not fully compliant yet. We're supposed to be by the end of 2015, but a lot's going to have to happen if we're going to make that deadline. So there is already an imperative for transparency, but it's been layered on top of all these regulations, and so it's quite burdensome.
Is there a grand bargain to be struck? I mean, is that sort of what we're talking about? Congress agrees to sort of back off this single failure approach to oversight. USAID maybe puts in some sort of more consultative agreement with the Hill. I mean, do you see the potential for something?
It's actually the same grand bargain that I had envisioned in the Foreign Assistance Reform Bill, which was an exchange of control for information. So instead of having these incredibly, as I've said, micromanaging or prescriptive ideas for how everything gets done, there's consultation and true consultation, not just, by the way, this is how we've decided to do it. And that's been, unfortunately, too often the way that consultation has been interpreted as just informing Congress of decisions that have already been made.
I think in your piece you talk about notification in place of consultation.
And that happens in the field with local communities as well as here with Congress. And to exchange that for, as I said, the transparency, so that anybody can look at any time, see where things are in the process, what's being done, how the money's being spent, what's being accomplished. And it's going to take a leap of faith for agencies and institutions that don't trust each other. But we're going to need to figure out how to get there eventually, because we're strangling our own ability to achieve the results we all want to get to.
So your third conclusion, let's talk about that one.
So the third conclusion is really less about aid and more about things that we can do that don't cost money that will help the system work. And there I'm really focusing on our own complicity in illicit financial flows. There are huge amounts of money flowing out of the developing world that eclipse the amount that's going in aid and investment combined. I believe the figure from Global Financial Integrity was about $1 trillion a year that is drained out of the developing world. Most of that actually is one form or another of tax evasion. Now, if developing countries were able to collect those taxes and use them effectively, and that's a big if, because nobody wants to pay taxes if they think it's all going to be squandered. So you have to be able to use the money for good purposes. Then you'd have a whole new source of finance for development. And there's a big conference going on this spring in Addis Ababa about financing for development. There are so many resources that are available to developing countries that are just being lost because local businesses don't want to keep their money there because they don't have places that they feel confident they can keep it, because international corporations don't want to have to pay taxes to that government, because corrupt individuals are taking the money that they have acquired through illicit means and stashing it somewhere in the West. And I don't think people understand how the United States government and our laws make it easy for that to happen. We're enabling it. And so just by doing something simple like removing the ability for anonymous corporations to hold bank accounts in the U.S. or to transact business in the U.S., we could be providing so much more assistance to these countries in raising their own resources.